Let me read to us Daniel chapter 6. It's been a while. We have not talked about Daniel. This is 4 weeks, right? We had a 3-week break. But here we go. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning his kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. "Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they answered and said before the king, "That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes this petition 3 times a day." And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed." So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. May my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command. And they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, and their wives. And the lions overpowered them, and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his kingdom shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So something really different happened to me today. I forgot, we've been out of Daniel for a while, that we did not finish the last handout. I completely forgot it. And so I was ready to talk about the next one, prayer. And I showed up, and Gianna said, so are we going to finish the last one? And I went, oh. And then I went, oh, well, how much is left? Really, is it worth it? And I was thinking, oh, I'll just skip it. And then I thought, there's actually a good bit left. So we're going to do it. So be aware, I haven't looked at it in a month. But we're going to do it. So we're picking it up, and I asked if we can put the handout, because you may not all have, how many of you have the handout? How many of you don't have the handout? Okay, so I think we can put the handout up on the screen, right? Awesome. So this maybe will help, and you can follow along, and so I'll present it. You know, if you were like going to like a scholarly thing, professors present papers, right, as it were. Okay, so maybe that's something like what we're doing. We're going to pick it up on page 5, and we're going to pick it up right here. Okay, and I'll kind of move us along as I do on this page. I'll say this page and that page and all that kind of thing. But the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. The Bible records another instance of the immutability, the unchanging law of the Medes and the Persians in the book of Esther. And classical writers do write about it. The Jewish Study Bible, I haven't looked at this in a month, so I may read more than I normally do. But it's worth looking at, and I'll explain why, but you'll see why in a few minutes. The Jewish Study Bible says, some ancient authors believe that the law of the Persian king once enacted could not be altered. This is likely only a popular tradition. However, it is emphasized for dramatic effect. That's what the Jewish Study Bible, which is Orthodox, it's not Messianic, that's what it says. And so basically we're contrasting the law of the Medes and Persians with the law of God. And the law of God will stand firm until beyond creation itself. It will not change. Matthew 24, verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Going over to page 6. Revelation 20, verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. So heaven and earth are going to pass away. Revelation 21:1. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. By the way, the book of Hebrews says the fact that a new covenant is, that we have a new covenant, is proof that fault could be found with the old covenant. Right? Y'all familiar with that verse? Well, if that's true, then the fact that there is a new heaven coming shows that fault can be found with the current heaven. The current heaven, number one, is not as good as it was before there was a church split in heaven and Satan fell. Also, just as the new covenant is better than the old covenant, the new heaven will be better than the old heaven. There are souls in Revelation chapter 6 under the altar in heaven, crying out, "How long, O Lord, just and true, until you judge those who have and avenge our blood upon on those who are on the earth?" Because they're crying out in heaven. That kind of prayer will not happen. God in Peter says, it says in Peter that God looks for a place wherein righteousness dwells, looking for a new heaven and a new earth. God can look at the floor in heaven and say, that spot right there, Satan has stood there. And he's going to create a new heaven where Satan has never stood. So there is a new heaven coming. Now, replacement theology, going back to page 6, teaches that the law of Moses will pass away, or has. But did Jesus actually teach that? In Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20, he said in his most famous sermon, Sermon on the Mount, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For surely I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law until all is fulfilled. I have never seen heaven, but I have seen the earth, and it still exists. And there is no means by which one jot or one tittle of all of the Torah will pass away as long as there is a heaven and an earth. Nothing has passed away." That throws a hole in a lot of people's theology, but Jesus did say that. He said in verse 19, "Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." In fact, as you look at those verses, in verses 19 and 20, it actually describes three different kinds of people. In verse 20, it's describing people who do not enter the kingdom of heaven. They don't go to heaven. Verse 19 describes two kinds of people that do go to heaven. In verse 19, you have those who are called great in heaven, and you have those who are called least in heaven. And the difference is based upon what they actually do with the Torah. That's actually what Jesus said. Now, our righteousness, if our righteousness does not exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, then we don't go to heaven. How do we get righteousness? Through Jesus. That's the only way to get righteousness. The only way to be declared right with God, which is what the word righteousness means, is through his sacrifice, completely depending upon Jesus. There is no other way. But once we are on our way to heaven and we're going to get in, heaven is not going to be the same for everybody. Hell is not going to be the same for everybody. Jesus talked about people getting great rewards. He talked about people getting beaten with many stripes, people being beaten with few stripes. Hell is not going to be the same for everybody. Some will have it worse than others. Heaven will not be the same for everybody. Some will have it better. Some will not have it as good. Once it is determined that we are going to heaven, God is a just God. And so it will say several places in the New Testament, in Romans and in Revelation, that God judges every man according to his works. So we don't go to heaven based upon works. We go to heaven based upon Jesus, period. Works are irrelevant. But God is just, and he judges every man based upon his works. Therefore, once you get to heaven, the reward that you get will be based upon your works. Or if a person goes to hell, once they get to hell, the punishment they get will be based upon works. All of the rewards are based upon works, and all of the punishments are based upon works. The destiny is not based upon works. The destiny is based upon Jesus, period. This is why Paul will say in Corinthians that some people will be like, their works will be like gold, silver, bronze, right? And they'll receive the reward. Others will be burned up like wood, hay, and stubble. And he says, but they will be saved, yet as through the fire. In other words, their works are burned up. They actually don't have the blessings that they could have had because their works did not survive, but they got to heaven. So heaven is great for everybody, but it is not the same for everybody. And hell is horrible for everybody, but it is not the same for everybody. Does that make sense? And this is the teaching of Jesus now. So the word for destroy, I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill, means to overthrow or throw down. The word to fulfill, I'm actually going to do some of this in the Shabbat service on Friday. The word to fulfill means to fill it up to the brim. And what Jesus is actually doing here is he's actually going to go right from Matthew 5:17 through 20, and he's now going to give 6 examples of how the fullness, what the fullness of the Torah means. And in no way does he diminish it. And actually, if we're going to be honest with what he actually does say, he makes it much more demanding. The New Testament is not less demanding, it's more demanding, according to Jesus. And we would expect it would be, because to he who much has been given, much is required. So we would expect that he would actually require things of us, since we have received a better covenant based upon better promises. So he goes right from Matthew 5:17 through 20 into giving these 6 examples where he shows that he did not overturn or overthrow or throw down the Torah. And we can see them. For example, murder. In Matthew 5:21 through 22, you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. But I say that who's ever angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. So did he make the standard easier or harder? Infinitely harder. Far more is required of the New Testament believer than of the Old Testament. Adultery, the next example in Matthew 5:17 through 20. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery. Did he lower the standard or did he raise the standard? He raised the standard. He goes to divorce. Furthermore, it's been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason, except for sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Does he lower the standard or does he raise the standard? He's consistently doing the same thing. Oaths. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oath to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. And he goes on. Okay? Then he goes with retaliation. You heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, don't resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you in your right cheek, turn to him the other also. So he's not lowering the standard. He's not overthrowing the law. He is showing the full purpose of the law, what it was always intended to be. We come to the next page, on page 7. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Again, he's not lowering the standard. He's raising the standard. So this is all the Sermon on the Mount. And he keeps saying, you heard that it was said, but I say, well, who was it who said? It was Moses. Moses is the one who said these things. You have heard that it was said, but I say. And what he's doing is he's showing what the fullness, he's fulfilling. He's showing what the full meaning of the Torah always was. And he has the right to tell us what the full meaning of the Torah always was. And the way he proves that he has the right to do that is because the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew chapters 5, 6, 7. That's the Sermon on the Mount. Moses went up into the mountain and received the 10 Commandments. You have heard that it was said by Moses, but I say, Moses goes up into the mountain and receives the commandments. Jesus goes up into the mountain, Sermon on the Mount, and he gives the meaning of the commandments. And then to prove that he has the right to say what the commandments mean, he comes down off of the mountain in Matthew chapters 8 and 9, and he does 10 miracles in a row. Why 10 miracles? To prove that he has the authority to tell you what the meaning of the 10 commandments are. And why does he have the authority to give you the real meaning of the 10 commandments? Because he is the Word of God, and he's the one who actually gave them to Moses. There's actually 10 miracles in a row, and I didn't discover that. I read that in the Word Biblical Commentary. There would be one, if you try to count them up, where it could throw you off, because, for example, among the 10 miracles, he'll heal two blind people. That's one miracle. Okay, and that's obvious. But there's another one that's not so obvious, and this will be the one that will throw your counting off. He heals Peter's mother-in-law, right? And then that night, they bring him a large group of people, and he heals everyone. So those two things, Peter's mother-in-law and everyone, are all one miracle. Why? Because they're all at the same house. So if you don't catch that, you'll think there's 11. But it actually is one miracle there, just as the two blind men are one miracle. Does that make sense? So what he's doing there in the Sermon on the Mount is he's saying, I'm giving you the full meaning of what the Torah always meant, and I have the authority to do this, and I'm going to prove it by doing these 10 miracles. So I would love to give you another example of how he does that kind of thing. I will quickly say it. On the first day of Sukkot, in John chapter 7, he goes up to Sukkot, and then on the last day, the great day of the feast, he says, "All who are thirsty, come unto me and drink, and I'll give you." And this he said of the Spirit. Okay, so that's that he's talking about the Spirit, but what he's doing is he's tying the water to the giving of the Spirit. When he did that, the Talmud says that he who has not seen the drawing of water at Sukkot has never seen rejoicing in his entire life. It's a very joyful moment. That's John chapter 7. John chapter 8 and John chapter 9, those three chapters are all Sukkot. John chapter 9, he tells a blind man to go to the pool of Siloam to get water, put it on his eyes, and he ends up seeing. Why does he tell the blind man to go to the pool of Siloam to get that water? Because that's where the water was gotten for the water ceremony in John chapter 7. And what he's doing is he's showing that he had the authority to say what he said in John 7. And when he said that in John 7, what he was actually saying was, do you see this whole water ceremony? It's all about me. He's this ridiculous, if it's not all about him, he's a megalomaniac. But it is all about him. And he proves it by using the water of that ceremony to heal a blind man. It's remarkable. It's the same thing he's doing here with these 10 miracles in Matthew following the Sermon on the Mount. I have the authority to tell you what the Torah really means. Now, from time to time on page 7, near the top there, God will bring the laws of men and the laws of God into conflict, and he makes a public display of them. So far, we've seen that twice in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar made a law that everybody had to worship the image of him. And then Darius makes a law that no one can pray to any god except for him for a month. Both laws were established to limit fundamental outward expressions of faith. In both cases, there was some talk about whether or not God could deliver. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 15, Nebuchadnezzar says to Daniel's three friends, "If you are ready at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, and symphony, with all the kinds of music, and you fall down and you worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is this God who can deliver you from my hand?" So there's this question now, could God deliver? And Nebuchadnezzar is the one who asks it. Then in Daniel chapter 6, verse 16, Darius, another king, says to Daniel, he says, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." So the king spoke this. It's like this question or this opportunity for God to show that he can deliver. The book of Daniel are going to have more examples of ungodly leaders enforcing ungodly rules upon the saints. For example, in Daniel chapter 7, which we're about to get into shortly, he will speak pompous words against the Most High, the Antichrist, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law, and then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half time. We'll look at that. All this then begs the question, which is the reason why why I stuck with this chapter when I realized we hadn't done it. How should Christians respond to unjust governments? Do we need to obey every law, even when they are unjust? On the one hand, anarchy says that we can disobey any law of man anytime we feel that it is appropriate. That's anarchy. On the other hand, radical patriotism says that civil disobedience is always wrong. That's like the Nazis saying I was just following orders. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two. How should followers of Yeshua respond to unjust laws? Going over to page 8. There's a book by Norm Geisler. It's called Christian Ethics. I read this in the 1990s when I was in seminary. It's a very good book. I know Greg's read it or is in it. It's a really good book. It deals with a bunch of interesting topics: abortion, euthanasia, biomedical issues, capital punishment, war, etc., civil disobedience. Different views on each of them, and gives his ethical reason for believing what he believes. So a lot of the rest of this material that I'm going to give to you comes from his book, which is a very good book. Okay, so here's 5 principles that he gives, he says, should guide us with regard to how we should respond to governments that have unjust laws. Number 1, obey its laws under God. Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Titus 3:1. Remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work. And 1 Peter 2, therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme. By the way, in 1983, Don and I were in the Air Force, we're married. She had already gotten out, but I was still in. And we were being transferred from Hawaii, yay. If you've not been there, that is a place to go, absolutely. We were being transferred from Hawaii to Minot, North Dakota. And thankfully it was August. And we were driving across Montana, which is a very long drive. And I drove like hours and hours. I think it was like 8 hours. And I just got to the point where I was just tired. And I said, Donna, would you be willing? And I'm driving fast, okay? I'm driving 85 miles an hour. Back in those days, it was 55. Okay, And I just got to the point where I was just tired. I said, Donna, so she said, sure. So she gets in the car, and I've been driving for like 8 hours. She gets in the car and she goes 0. We had a Toyota Tercel, and she went from 0 to 85 in like, it probably took 2 minutes to get there. And right away, a cop pulled us over. And the cop walks up to the window, driver's license and registration. And he comes back to the window, and he's doing, and he says, ma'am, I can see from your bumper sticker that you're a Christian. Titus 3:1 says to obey every law and magistrate. Donna just broke. Now, all she did was follow my example, but she just totally broke. She's bawling, right? It was driving. It was called a daytime ticket. It was $5. We thought, wow. We get to our base in Minot, North Dakota, and the insurance company that we had would not insure us. It's only $5. It's a daytime, but that's reckless driving. We will not insure you at all. We ended up having to go to another company, and it cost us like significantly more, like $150 more every 6 months, So we are called to obey the laws. Number 2, pray for oppressive governments. 1 Timothy 2. Therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, for presidents, and for all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and reverence. Exodus 2:23. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of their bondage. Pray. Their cry came out to God. Pray for oppressive governments. Number 3. Disobey oppressive commands. Now, this is a quote from Geisler. Biblical civil disobedience does not reject God's punishment, but accepts the penalties for disobeying the law. For example, the 3 Hebrew children refused to worship the idol, but they do not refuse to go to the fiery furnace. Likewise, Daniel rejects the order to pray to the king, but accepts the consequent punishment of the lion's den. And the apostles refuse to stop preaching Christ, but accept the punishment of going to prison. Number 4, on page 9, flee oppressive governments. Christians do not need, this is again Geisler quote, Christians do not need to be passive targets of tyranny. We do not need to be dartboards for despots. When oppressed, we should flee to freedom. He is the highest authority, and his word alone binds our conscience absolutely. The prophets fled from Jezebel in 1 Kings 18. Israel fled from Egypt in Exodus 12. And even Jesus' family fled from Herod in Matthew 2. So while not using force against unjust governments, we should at least flee their force against us. Number 5, patiently endure suffering. Admittedly, fleeing is not always possible or successful. Sometimes Christians must suffer patiently for Christ's sake. 1 Peter 4. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. Sometimes we must suffer oppression for Christ, or even martyrdom. Revelation 13:10. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. There are 2 views on how to disobey government. One of them is to revolt, and the other is to refuse. To revolt, that is to revolt against it violently, to fight it, and to reject its punishment. To refuse is to refuse to obey it non-violently, to flee it, and to accept its punishment. Some think that the Bible actually approves of some revolutions. You may not agree with some of the things you're about to hear, but consider this. This is again a quote from Geisler. For several reasons, the single instance, only one example in the Bible of a God-appointed revolution against Athaliah, the queen, in 2 Chronicles chapter 23, cannot be used to support revolutions. This was not a divinely approved human revolution. It was a divinely I'm going to read that again. This was not a divinely approved human revolution. It was a divinely appointed revolution. It was a special case for Israel, the Messianic nation, and cannot be applied to other nations. If Athaliah's power had not been usurped, she would have killed Joash, the remaining heir to the Davidic line leading up to Christ. The Bible speaks consistently against revolution, and the Bible does not contradict itself. Hence, this isolated instance, whatever its special significance, cannot be used to contradict the consistent teaching of the rest of the Scripture against revolutions. 2 Chronicles chapter 23. Then all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God. And he, Jehoiada, the priest, said to them, Behold, the king's son shall reign, as the Lord has said of the sons of David. He was the appropriate king. This is what you shall do. 1/3 of you entering on the Sabbath, and I won't read it all, but if you go down to page 10, verse 14, and Jehoiada the priest brought out the captains of hundreds who were set over the army, and said to them, Take her outside under guard and slay her with the sword, and whoever follows her. It's a divinely appointed one because he is the king, that boy. It's just different. Bottom of page 10. Will tyranny reign if there are no revolutions? Some of this is going to start to challenge some of the way that we as Americans think. Okay? Will tyranny reign if there are no revolutions? Revolutions are not the only way to fight tyranny. An unjust government can be resisted by prayer, moral example, lawful political action, justified disobedience, flight, and patient suffering when necessary. Rejection forgets that God is sovereign over the affairs of government and sets up and takes away whom he will. In brief, we can do many things to resist tyranny, and God can do infinitely more. Patient suffering, if Norm Geisler is correct, then believers should heavily weigh the consequences of those times when they feel led to disobey government. Essentially, God's call to disobey should be seen as a call by God to martyrdom. Martyrdom need not always be a matter of the death penalty. Martyrdom can also require the loss of certain freedoms, favors, or status. That's martyrdom. In Daniel chapter 3, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah recognized that their disobedience to bow before the idol could result in their martyrdom, yet they did not bow. They said, Our God is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, we will not serve your gods. In Daniel chapter 6, Daniel recognized that praying to the God of Israel could result his being thrown into the lion's den. Daniel 6, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, he knelt down, he prayed, as was his custom. Paul modeled an awareness of patient suffering in the New Testament, Acts 25. So Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know. For if I am an offender or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. All the apostles suffered martyrdom. Yeshua corrected James and John for wanting to defend the faith with militaristic behavior. Significantly, Yeshua is not correcting them for acting with self-defense. He is correcting them for wanting to defend the faith. There is a difference. Going over to page 12. I'm going to let you get it on the screen, the top of the page. Whatever both sides are going to have on this political are going to feel strong. I urge you to vote. I urge you to vote. It matters. Matthew 22. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And they said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God's the things that are God's. So one of the things that we are to render our Caesar is our vote. Vote. Steward your citizenship. Acts 22, verse 25. As they bound him with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? It is not impossible that martyrdom could come upon the people of faith in the U.S. It is possible. It is possible that people of faith can prevent such atrocities. Daniel is an example of a man who lived his faith in the public and in the political arena. Now, so I really want to encourage everybody to vote. I've already voted. Okay. How many of you already voted? Good for you. Vote. Now, if some wars are just, because some wars are just, and he explains that in the scripture, and that's just a part of Christian theology. It's Bible, it's Old Testament, it's New Testament. There are just wars. If some wars are just, why not some revolutions? Again, from Geisler. Wars and revolutions are not in the same category. Just wars are fought by God-ordained governments, to which he did give the sword in Romans chapter 13, verse 4. But revolutions are fought by citizens to whom God did not give the sword against God-ordained governments. God never gave the sword to citizens to use on their government. He gave it to governments to use on rebellious citizens. Just wars are waged against another nation that is aggressing against one's own nation. They are, in effect, fatal family feuds. In a revolution, we are, as it were, killing off our own kin. In opposing the government God established, one is thereby opposing God who established it, according to Romans chapter 13, verse 2. Just wars, on the other hand, protect one's country against aggression by another country and are fought in self-defense. And then he deals this, which I think is probably challenging for a lot of Americans. Okay, this is a really challenging paragraph, and it will give you something to think about. Was the American Revolution just? That's a good question. And he has a surprising answer. It is understandable that everyone would like, this is his thoughts. It is understandable that everyone would like to believe that the revolution in his country was just, even if those in other countries are not. But in all honesty, given the biblical criteria listed here, it is not possible to justify the American Revolution either. What then should Americans do on the 4th of July? Can they really celebrate American independence from Britain? In response, a distinction should be made. There is a difference between what is born and how it is born. We're certainly glad for every human being born of fornication and even rape, although we certainly do not approve of the way they got here. Likewise, an American Christian can celebrate what was born of the American Revolution, a great free country, without thereby approving of the way that it arrived. I think that's worth considering, or I wouldn't have given it to you. Finally, on page 13, and we're not going to begin the next handout at all. So bring all that back, okay? But on page 13, the last thing, summary and conclusions that he offers regarding civil disobedience. There are three basic views regarding civil disobedience. The first is anarchism, basically anarchy. It approves of it at any time. The second is radical patriotism, never approves of disobeying government. And the third is biblical submissionism. It holds that it is sometimes right to do so. While most Christians believe the Bible supports the latter view, there is disagreement about when disobedience is justified. That's what he's saying. Most people are going to say, yeah, biblical submissionism, but when is disobedience okay? And there's two possible answers he offers. Hard words. Anti-promulgationalists insist upon the right to disobey any law that permits actions contrary to God's word. God's word says to do it. I don't need to do it because God's word says don't do it. So anti-promulgationalists. Anti-compulsionists, on the other hand, hold that disobedience is justified only when one is compelled to do an evil. Even among those who agree that disobedience to government is sometimes called for, there is a difference of opinion concerning how one should disobey. Some believe in 1, revolting against an unjust government, but 2, the biblical view calls for resisting it without rebelling against it. Such resistance is not passive acceptance of injustice in government, but it can involve an active, spiritual, moral, and political campaign against it. Now note these words by anti-promulgationalists and anti-compulsionists are coined by Norm Geisler. They're not in the dictionary. So if you try to look them up, you're not going to find them, because I did. But Geisler effectively defines them for us in his thoughts here. Establish the decree and sign the writing. The court jesters wanted King Darius to put the decree in writing so that it would put pressure on the king to stick with his own edict. They were backing the king into the corner. In the end, the king will release Daniel from the lion's den and respond like a cornered lion. And so that's the end of that handout. And I can imagine some might want to say something, because it is kind of like when I read that, I thought to myself, wow, okay, that's not the way I would have thought had I not read that. And I can understand why not everyone would agree with it. But it is a challenging thought. Anybody want to say anything before we go? Can y'all hear what you do? Just say it again.
Okay. So my question is regarding Romans 13, verse 3. For context, Pastor Greg quoted 13:1. Let every person submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist are put in place by God. So a couple verses down, it says, I mean, to me, it kind of gives a definition of a good or godly leader in Romans 3.
I'm going to answer it real quick, and I got to stop because of the food, and it's 5:30 and 6 o'clock, and they do a lot of work there. So, but I'm going to give a real quick answer. Okay, who was the godly leader, or rather, who was the leader when Paul wrote that? And the answer is Nero. Okay, Nero was a man who took Christians, impaled them on sticks, put char or tar on them, and lit them on fire so that he could walk through his garden at night and enjoy the beauty of his garden. That is the leader that Paul is writing about in Romans 13. That's about as bad as you can get. So he's a horrible leader. Well, what he's saying is that leaders exist for good cause.